Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Welcome. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says by not doing enough to tackle the drug crisis in our country, our trade relationship with the U.S. is being strained. Talks between Canada Post and its union have grinded to a halt as the strike by CUPW workers enters its 13th day. And the Alberta government is fighting back against Ottawa's oil and gas production cap through the Alberta Sovereignty within a United Canada Act.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre blasted Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in the House of Commons. Poilievre says the federal government is not doing enough to tackle the drug crisis here in our country, which is also impacting our trade relationship with the United States.
The Prime Minister's disastrous legalization and liberalization of drugs has the Americans worried, in addition to costing 47,000 deaths in Canada. Where's the plan to stop the drugs and keep our border open to trade?
The reality is we're going to continue to work constructively with the incoming administration to protect Canadian jobs, to protect Canadian growth, to take the responsible approach that isn't steeped in partisanship, that pulls together the Team Canada approach that stands up for Canadians instead of throwing our arms up and saying all is broken like the leader of the opposition.
Talks between Canada Post and the union representing its workers have reportedly grinded to a halt. Now, in a statement from Canada Post, a special mediator on behalf of CUPW workers notified them that they will not be responding to further proposals after remaining quiet over several days. The strike, now officially on for 13 days, has disrupted at least 10 million parcel deliveries as of Monday, and that number continues to rise. Picket lines from postal workers, including here in Lethbridge, continue nearly 2 weeks into the strike. Around 95% of delivery teams are full-time employees, and Canada Post is proposing to add more part-time permanent positions for guaranteed hours and benefits. You know, many people are quite concerned what the strike the Canada Post will have and the impact on the upcoming Lethbridge West by-election set to take place on December the 18th. With deliveries at a standstill, it could very well affect how mail-in ballots are received. A spokesperson with Elections Alberta provides details of how using special ballots in place of the standard mail-in ballots will work if you can't vote in person.
So if an elector isn't able to vote in person during any of the advanced voting days or on election day on December 18th, another option that they have is called a special ballot, which is basically a mail-in ballot. So the important thing to know with those is that the elector needs to request that in advance, and then it's mailed out to them. Obviously, we are experiencing a strike right now with Canada Post, so right now we're using a courier service to get those ballots to electors. Those are being mailed out daily, and we've received, a normal, if not high, volume of requests for those so far. When electors receive their special ballot package, they receive instructions for how to return it as well. So there's a couple ways they can do that. They can return it in person to the returning office in Lethbridge. They can mail it. If they mail it, that will be delivered to the Elections Alberta headquarters in Edmonton. And, with that option, because we are still experiencing a strike, that would be a courier service as well. When we provide the instructions for return, we do provide a postage paid envelope as well. In the event that the strike lifts during the election period, they can use that return postage paid envelope to have that cost covered.
Advance voting for the by-election will take place December 10th through the 14th, with Election Day to occur on Wednesday, the 18th. Alberta government officials are fighting back once again on the Trudeau government's imposed cap on oil and gas production. They say if implemented, it would cut production by at least 1 million barrels a day of oil and gas in Alberta and could kill over 100,000 jobs. Now, in response, the province will introduce the Alberta Sovereignty within a United Canada Act to stop a federal cap and protect thousands of good-paying jobs.
We're fighting back with every weapon in our arsenal. The Alberta Sovereignty within a United Canada Act was designed to protect our province from unconstitutional interference, and now we're going to use it again. The motion we're putting forward in the legislature uses the Act to ask the Legislative Assembly for approval to shield Alberta if the production cap becomes law. These actions could include an immediate constitutional challenge in the courts, a ban on provincial bodies enforcing the cap, labeling oil and gas production facilities as essential infrastructure subject to the Alberta Critical Infrastructure Defence Act, prohibiting the entry of all individuals into these facilities except those licensed to enter by the Alberta government, and declaring all information related to greenhouse gases at these facilities to be owned by Alberta's government, with data reported or disclosed at our discretion.
Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson says Premier Smith and her party are taking a very strong line in protecting the oil sands in Fort McMurray under the Alberta Sovereignty Act, which many would argue is a strong economic driver for our province and country, the oil sands. Mr. Dawson explains how this act would actually work.
There will also be a restriction on any federal officials entering any oil and gas facility without prior provincial approval. And the last part is, well, there are other components, but the other major part is the government's going to declare that all emissions data coming from oil sands facilities basically is proprietary provincial data and can only be released at their discretion.
Tyler Dawson will also have details of how there's a push to change Alberta's driver's licenses. He'll have the details coming up later in our show. Ontario Premier Doug Ford is calling U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's tariff threats serious and unfounded. Trump is threatening to impose a 25% tariff on Canadian goods coming from Canada and Mexico after he takes office in January. He says they will remain in effect until Canada and Mexico stop illegal border crossings and prevent drugs like fentanyl from entering the United States. Ford says Trump's comments were simply insulting.
I found his comments unfair. I found him insulting. It's like a family member stabbing you right in the heart. I spent a lot of time in the U.S., and I have yet to talk to one American that has any issue with Canadians. To President-elect Trump, there's no closer ally, there's no other country in the world that has stood shoulder to shoulder with our American counterparts, our friends, our family. It's an insult to the 900,000 Americans that are living here in Canada. It's an insult to the 9 million Americans that wake up every single morning to produce products to ship up to Ontario alone.
Now, the Canadian dollar declined to its lowest level in 4 years after Trump threatened to impose 25% tariffs on Canadian goods once he takes office. The threat of tariffs added a further drag on the loonie, which has been moving lower against the American greenback since September. Economists call the prospect of tariffs a fairly stiff tailwind. We have more on this report from the Canadian Press.
The Canadian dollar is trading around 71 cents U.S., its lowest level since May 2020, after Donald Trump threatened to impose tariffs on Canadian goods shipped to the U.S. once he takes office in January. The threat of tariffs is yet another drag on the loonie, which has already been moving lower against the U.S. dollar since September. BMO Capital Markets senior economist Robert Kafsick called the prospect of tariffs a pretty stiff headwind for a currency under pressure from domestic economic factors. The Canadian dollar has been weakening because of the softer economy and recent interest rate cuts by the Bank of Canada. But the tariffs aren't policy yet. Carl Schmada of foreign exchange company Corpay says the president-elect's history would suggest that the threats are more of an opening gambit in the negotiation process. He says the loonie could strengthen once traders assess the situation from a more nuanced perspective.
Yeah, the loonie's been cooler, and so has the weather here across much of southwestern Alberta. Jeanette Rocher is now with an early look at the forecast. Jeanette, will the cooler temperatures remain for a few more days for Lethbridge, or will things warm up enough so that we can maybe head out and build a snowman or even a snow fort?
Well, I'd say there's no time like the present, Hal. You can do that any time now. I've been out quite a bit this week, and I have to say it hasn't felt horrible, in my opinion. It's possibly because we've had very little wind, only 15 kilometers per hour. So it's felt mostly calm and mild, even though the temperatures have been a little bit cooler. And speaking of cooler temperatures, tomorrow should be the chilliest this week with a daytime high of -13. Also expect a very chilly chilly wind chill, especially tomorrow morning. It's going to feel more like -25. Now, as we get past Thursday, though, then things are going to start warming up a little bit. We're going to get back into the minus single digits and even the plus double digits by early next week. We're talking 10 and 12 degrees above freezing. So you better make your snowman or your fort before it all melts away. I'll be back later in the show to tell you all about the warming trend that's headed our way.
Let the meltdown begin. Thanks so much, Jeanette. The city of Kelowna will be hosting the 2026 Memorial Cup. The Canadian Hockey League made the announcement earlier on Wednesday. The Kelowna Rockets beat out 4 other WHL teams, including Lethbridge, Medicine-Hat, Brandon, and Spokane. The Rockets previously hosted the Memorial Cup back in 2004, which marked the first and only time Kelowna has won the CHL's championship event. Now, throughout the Kelowna Rockets' 33-year history, there have been a total of 76 players from the club drafted to the National Hockey League, including current NHLers Tyler Myers, Luke Shen, and Tyson Barrie. Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston won a large majority after winning the provincial election on Tuesday night. He also increased the size of his government to 43 seats. He told voters he needed a new mandate to send a strong message to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Make It Happen was never meant just to be about winning another mandate. Make It Happen is about what we do with that mandate. And I want to tell you and your family that we will make a lot happen with this mandate, because that's what you have a right to expect. You and your family are counting on us to stand up for you, and we will. The message that Nova Scotians delivered loud and clear, and the message that I received: stick to one agenda. And we have one agenda, and that's you, Nova Scotians. That's where our focus will always be. My promise to you is I will give you every single thing I have. I am going to work hard to do more and go faster. And I will always, every single day, be proud to be Nova Scotian, just like you are.
The Green Party of Canada has introduced a private members bill they say will truly address the housing affordability crisis here in our country. Green MP Mike Maurice says with their motion, more Canadians will be able to get into affordable housing.
The motion aims to specifically set 2 clear income-based definitions for both deeply affordable and affordable housing, and then to require CMHC to apply these definitions consistently across all of its funds. This would then, of course, allow the federal government to better track progress against housing goals, and most importantly, take an evidence-based approach to the significant housing crisis that we are in.
A report from the Lethbridge Encampment Response Team has shown that encampments have increased throughout our city from the same time last year. The report presented to Lethbridge City Council shows that encampments rose from 186 in 2023 to 221 in 2024 throughout the reporting period of August the 24th through November the 1st. More than half of all encampments are reported to be around the shelter and resource center. Now, in an interesting twist, dramatic decreases were reported in encampments within Lethbridge parks, including a 65% decrease at Galt Gardens and 64% decline around the Civic Arena last year. Debris, however, nearly tripled from 5,700 kilograms recovered in 2023 to 15,900 kilograms this year. More details of the report can be found on the City of Lethbridge website. A car seat check stop program was carried out today by the Lethbridge Police. The initiative aims to ensure child occupant restraints are properly installed, answer any questions, and provide installation advice. Now, the sergeant in charge of the traffic response unit with the LPS, Daniel Lomness, says this is the second check stop they've had this year, and he explains the importance of this initiative.
We opened up to the public and put it out to the public where they can come to a specific location. And Toys R Us has been graciously, a great partner with us in this. So people can come here, and officers trained in child seat safety can basically assess, the installation of the car seats and if the child's in the safest position as possible. Right now, with car seat safety, especially with weather cooling down, is obviously kids in bigger, warmer gear, like a snow gear. It's definitely recommended that, especially for longer travel, that kids go into a vehicle with a 5-point harness car seat, that they have as thin of clothing as possible in the vehicle, just to allow the car seat restraint system to operate correctly. If there's too much space with a snowsuit, or if it's too puffy, it just creates too much movement for the child and they're not as safe. Last year, it ranged from 20 to 30 people. Based on the weather and the time, we're hoping to beat those numbers.
Today, they checked our vehicle to make sure that the car seat was proper for my daughter, and everything looked good. There's a couple of things that I just had to adjust, but it's kind of nice, especially it's winter and everybody's slipping and sliding. So just to have that extra security. Her safety is important. She's the most precious thing that I have in my life, and so I want to make sure that she's safe while I'm driving this winter, and so it's a good checkup to have.
What a cutie. And Lethbridge police say children are safest and should remain in the back seat until they're at least 13 years of age. The Get a Tune-Up and Give a Tune-Up campaign is a new community-focused initiative aimed at supporting our local youth. Now, the folks at Bike Lane here in Lethbridge are partnering with Big Brothers and Big Sisters in Lethbridge to help launch the campaign. Matthew Hellawell, owner of Bike Lane, says the program, which began on November 20th and will run until March 31st, is a very special initiative. He says $10 from every bicycle or e-bike tune-up at Bike Lane will sponsor bicycle repairs for local children and youth involved in Big Brothers and Big Sisters programs.
The real driver behind it is to both help people get tune-ups in a less busy part of the season, as well as then giving back in the spring. Basically, we're gonna take $10 from our side of every tune-up that we get done over the winter, and then we're gonna put that together and we're gonna do a tune-up event at Big Brothers Big Sisters and tune up as many bikes as we can. It might end up being a multi-day type event if we get enough money raised, and so it's just a really nice way for the whole community to support young riders, and typically, people who are bringing their bikes in are adults, so it's a nice way for them to kind of make sure that the biking community keeps going through the younger generations as well. If you come in for a basic tune-up on an analog bike, you're paying us $80 and we're putting $10 of that toward this event for Big Brothers Big Sisters. Similarly, if you get a e-bike tune-up, it's $95, so you're paying the $95, but we're putting $10 of that toward the event. We're hoping that the community will bring their bikes in for tune-ups between now and the end of March to help us with this initiative.
Help to support Big Brothers and Big Sisters. That's awesome. I myself was a Big Brother as well. And this year alone, Big Brothers and Big Sisters have impacted over 26,400 youth in over 1,100 communities across the country. Well, it was fairly cool today in Lethbridge once again, and cloudy as well. And those cooler conditions should remain for most of the week. Full weather details are on deck. Well, we had a mainly overcast day today and fairly cool here in Lethbridge. Jeanette Rocher is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, it appears as though a warming trend will be hitting our city, but not for, a few more days?
Yes, as we look towards early next week, we're seeing those warm temperatures coming at us here. We're going to be seeing the double digits there over freezing, but not until we reach Monday or Tuesday, because first of all, we have to get through Thursday. So tomorrow morning, expect -25 wind chill, but a daytime high of -13 degrees. -8 expected on Friday with clear skies, and then partly cloudy skies on Saturday with a high of -4. Not too bad at all. -5 expected on Sunday with clear skies again. And then all of a sudden, we're going to jump up to those double-digit temperatures. Look at that, 10 degrees on Monday, up to 12 degrees on a Tuesday. That's going to put us well above seasonal average for this time of year. So average high for this time of year, 2 degrees, average low -10. 19 was our record high on this day back in 1922. And in 1985, Lethbridge saw its coldest on record on this day, which was -35. Sun rose this morning at 8:03, sunset this afternoon at 4:36, giving us 2 minutes less daylight today than we had yesterday. On the west coast tomorrow, we're going to be seeing some precipitation, particularly in the morning. 7 for the high in Victoria, with a 30% chance of showers in the morning, 30% chance of drizzle in Vancouver tomorrow, 5 for the high there. -16 the expected high tomorrow in Edmonton, and -14 in Calgary. Partly cloudy skies in both of those cities. Also expecting some wind chill factors in the -20s, particularly in the morning. Speaking of wind chill, there's a frostbite warning in effect for both Saskatoon and Regina, as they're looking at wind chill factors in the minus 30s. A daytime high of minus 21 in Saskatoon, minus 19 in Regina, and minus 11 expected tomorrow in Winnipeg. Winnipeg seeing periods of light snow. As we look to Toronto, though, we're going to see a 60% chance of snow, changing to a 60% chance of showers. All that happening before noon. 5 for the high there. 2 degrees expected tomorrow in Ottawa with a mix of sun and cloud. In Montreal, expecting periods of light snow with a high of 4 degrees. Now, as we see the Atlantic coast here, things are looking kind of calm tomorrow, but by tomorrow evening, that's where things start to change. So tomorrow's high in Fredericton, 5 degrees, seeing mainly sunny skies, but by the evening, they could get significant rainfall and even snow. Could expect 5 to 10 millimeters of rain and 15 centimeters of snow, one or the other. Same thing for Halifax, looking at mainly calm conditions tomorrow, 6 for the high there, and could see 20 millimeters of rain beginning by Thursday evening. Charlottetown, beautiful sunshine tomorrow, 4 degrees for the high, but bracing for their first significant snowfall by Thursday night into Friday morning. They could get up to exceeding 10 centimeters of snow. And then in St. John's, looking at 40% chance of rain or snow. So there you have it. That's 4 degrees there in St. John's. That's your weather forecast.
Mediation has been suspended in the Canada Post strike. Federal Labour Minister Steve McKinnon is calling the Crown Corporation and the Canadian Union of Postal Workers to his office as the special mediator appointed to help end the labour dispute says the two sides are way too far apart. McKinnon says he will be telling both sides that they alone are responsible for the consequences of their job action, which has stalled mail and parcel delivery service since November the 15th. Around 55,000 workers are on the picket lines calling for a fair wage and better working conditions, which Canada Post insists will add heavy costs and create inflexibility in the postal service. It appears as though fewer drivers intend to buy an EV for their next vehicle purchase. That's according to a report by EY Canada, which says overall intentions among respondents to buy a fully electric vehicle within the next couple of years fell to just 15% this year. Now, that is down 3% from 2023. Limited driving range, the price tag of EVs, expensive battery replacements, and a lack of charging infrastructure are among the top concerns respondents have. The accounting firm says these issues need to be addressed if Canada wants to meet its target of all new light-duty vehicle sales being zero-emission by the year 2035. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 83 points on the day to finish at 25,488. The Dow was down 138 points to 44,722. The S&P 500 was down 22 on the day to 5998, and the Nasdaq was down 115 points to 19,060. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 2 cents to 68.79 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 28 cents to 3.20 US. Gold was up $2.34 on the day to $26.3540 US an ounce, and silver was down 35 cents to $30.09 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.35 per bushel, barley's at $6.53, canola's at $13.15, and corn is at $7.54 per bushel. Live cattle December contract was down $1.13 to $187.35. Feeder cattle January contract was up 68 cents to $258.78. And lean hogs December contract was down 70 cents to $82.40. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 71.30 US. Recapping one of our top stories, talks between Canada Post and the union representing its workers have reportedly grinded to a halt. In a statement from Canada Post, a special mediator on behalf of CUPW workers notified them that they will not be responding to further proposals after remaining quiet over several days. The strike, now officially on for 13 days, has disrupted at least 10 million parcel deliveries as of Monday, and that number continues to rise. The Alberta government says in an effort to save thousands of jobs in the oil and gas sector, the province will be introducing the Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act to fight Ottawa's cap on our energy sector. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will have details for us momentarily. When you see news happening in your community, drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews. Alberta Premier Daniel Smith says the province will introduce a motion under the Alberta Sovereignty Act. Now, this time it's in relation to the proposed emissions cap on the oil and gas sector, which Smith says could create major economic damage and lead to thousands of job losses. Tyler Dawson is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post. He joins us now from Edmonton to talk about this in a little more detail. Now, Tyler, it appears as though Alberta government officials are taking a very strong line in protecting our oil sands.
It seems like it. I mean, one of the things with the Sovereignty Act when it was first introduced, when it was invoked last year around this time on the clean electricity regulations, was really the question of what it would do, what it could do. Of course, Alberta cannot opt out of federal laws, for example. So the realities of the Sovereignty Act's applicability has sort of been, I think, narrowed a little bit from when it was first proposed. But what we saw on Tuesday was probably one of the more robust responses that could have been imagined under the Sovereignty Act. And it was quite interesting because one of them refers to the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act, which people may remember from back in, I think it was 2020 or 2021, when there were a lot of rail blockade protests. It was also used during the COVID era to disperse protests around hospitals, things like that. So oil and gas facilities are going to get protection under that. There will also be a restriction on any federal officials entering any oil and gas facility without prior provincial approval. And the last part is, well, there are other components, but the other major part is the government's going to declare that all emissions data coming from oil sands facilities basically is proprietary provincial data and can only be released at their discretion. So it's a little bit unclear, I think, what all of this might look like in practice. But of course, there's the possibility that the emissions cap never comes in anyways. It's obviously going to take some time to develop what the sort of ceiling for emissions is going to look like. I believe they're collecting data over the next year or two before potentially introducing the actual cap. There's a very good chance there will be a different federal government by then, and it's hard to imagine that a Prime Minister, Pierre Poilievre, is going to pursue policies that are the same towards the oil and gas sector that the Ottawa the Liberals are in Ottawa. So bit of a, there's things up in the air, certainly. So we may never see any of this stuff come into effect, but certainly they've got their ducks in a row a little bit and are bearing their fangs, so to speak, on this particular front.
The UCP has called for the Lethbridge West by-election, Tyler. Voters will be going to the polls a week before Christmas on December the 18th. Now, the two front-runners so far, UCP's John Middleton Hope and the NDP's Rob Miyashiro. Tyler, December 18th, kind of an odd time to be voting, but Premier Daniel Smith didn't really have much choice, did she?
No, I mean, so this is to replace Shannon Phillips, of course, the NDP MLA who stepped down, and I believe she stepped down on Canada Day. And so there's basically was sort of 6 months timeline to get this thing done. So a week before Christmas it is. I'm very curious to see what voter turnout is going to be. People will surely have other things on their minds. But, on the flip side, maybe people will be like, well, we've been waiting 6 months for a representative. Maybe I better get out and vote. So that part of it is going to be interesting. I mean, turnout is not usually humongous for by-elections anyways. And part of the reason it was delayed is because Naheed Nenshi, the NDP leader, doesn't have a seat in the legislature yet. And Smith had said, look, I'd rather run 2 by-elections at the same time to sort of save on costs instead of running 2 separate ones at different times. He's not shown any particular inclination. He doesn't seem to be in a hurry, at any rate, to get into the legislature. So that's sort of, I think, why it ended up waiting as long as it did. Now, the other thing, of course, which I think we've talked about before, is that this is really going to be the first electoral test of Nenshi's NDP. He became leader back in the late spring, early summer. There hasn't been a by-election since then. There hasn't been any real test of his party. So it'll be quite interesting to see how they perform, if they can hold on to this NDP seat that it has been since, I think, 2015. And of course, this will be a little bit of a referendum in some way on the performance of Danielle Smith's government, whether or not people like the track that her folks are on right now. So an odd time, possibly not massive voter turnout, but I think we'll be able to draw a few conclusions from this regardless of what ends up happening.
Why wouldn't the Alberta NDP leader Naheed Nenshi push harder to try and get a seat so he can debate Smith at the legislature? You're the party leader. You should be there. Doesn't that make sense?
Yeah, it is weird because he also loses access to a bunch of stuff. I mean, he's not around to talk to reporters to the same extent that he would be if he was in the House. They're not able to get social media clips of him in the legislature. It lowers his profile a little bit, and it does seem like he's kept a relatively low profile over the past 6 months, which it seems to be an odd set of choices for the people around him right now. There was a train of thought that when Jagmeet Singh, the federal NDP leader, first became NDP leader, and he didn't have a seat in Parliament, and there was this idea that, well, maybe he can float above the fray of sort of question period and the mudslinging and stuff like that for a little while. So that's maybe the philosophy that the Nenshi NDP are operating under right now. But it does strike me as odd, and even some of the UCP people I've talked to, I mean, they obviously want him in the House for the same reasons. They want to be able to feud with him in question period and things like that. But they're sort of like, well, where is he? He should be more of a threat than he seems to be right now. So it is sort of an odd situation.
Some big news in our provincial capital, Tyler, in that half of the jail at the Edmonton Youth Offender Centre will be converted into an addictions treatment facility for youth. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so this is a $23 million renovation project, and it's going to take about half of that facility to renovate it to create, I think, 105 addiction spaces for minors. Now, while it's going to be at that site, it is not going to be part of the jail. There will be no shared living spaces. There will be no overlap between the sort of incarcerated youth and the youth who are there for addictions treatment. That 105 number is pretty significant. There are currently about 70 youth addictions beds in the province. So adding 105, bringing the total up to 175 is, a really, really significant increase in the number of treatment spaces available. And this is part, obviously, of this whole major sort of investment that the UCP has been doing in mental health and addictions for the past 5 or 6 years, 5 years, I guess. And it's part of the Alberta model of treating drug addiction, which is essentially trying to get people into treatment and into recovery, focusing less on harm reduction, more on detox and sobriety and things like that. So it's a little unclear, I think, to what extent there is an addictions crisis among youth in Alberta, among minors in Alberta. I spoke to the minister this week, and Dan Williams, the mental health and addictions minister, and he said it's certainly getting worse, and that a lot of the sort of community and social supports that existed before the COVID-19 pandemic have gone away, and that sort of, led to an expansion of this crisis across sort of all demographics. But there's going to be a lot more access at any rate, and people will be able to voluntarily enter that facility. There could also be the situation where youth are mandated into treatment. Now, of course, we've been talking about this down the road, probably next spring for adults. The rules that allow for a youth to be put into mandatory treatment actually have existed since 2006. So it'll be sort of a two-prong stream of people, I guess, who could end up in this facility getting treatment.
With Liberal MP Randy Boissonnault out of Justin Trudeau's cabinet, that means Alberta no longer has specific representation in cabinet. So Tyler, what kind of an impact will this really have on our province in the short term? I mean, many people argue in the long term it's no big deal since Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives will be elected next year anyway.
Well, and then, the other way to dismiss it, I suppose, would be to say, well, are the Liberals listening to anyone from Alberta anyways? So, does it really matter? It does matter, I think, in the case of Jasper. Randy Boissonnault was the lead on the Jasper sort of rebuild. So on that front, I think it could matter a little bit. I mean, that's not to say that the Liberals are not committed to the Jasper rebuild and things like that. But it probably didn't hurt to have an Alberta voice at that table for some of those discussions. Certainly, it'll make it'll make announcements a little more challenging in Alberta. It'll make some of the sort of information coming back to Ottawa from Alberta a little bit more challenging. But there isn't really another option for them to fill that seat. There's only one other Liberal MP in Alberta, and that's George Chahal down in Calgary. And there's no Liberals at all from Saskatchewan. So it's slim pickings if they wanted to restaff cabinet with some prairie representation there. So I don't know if it's going to be a massive impact. I doubt it will be, actually, but it does probably matter a little bit on some of these issues.
Tyler, former Prime Minister Stephen Harper is now the board chair of AIMCO, the Investment Crown Corporation, which runs the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund and manages public pension plans. Now, even though he's been out of government for close to 10 years now and does not have experience managing pension plans, Premier Daniel Smith feels, you know what, he's the right person for the job here.
Yeah, they'd apparently been trying to get him on board for quite some time, and there were a few logistical difficulties that needed to get sorted out. But he's in now, and you're right, he doesn't have any particular pension fund management experience, although he has been on the board of investment funds and venture capital firms and things like that over the past decade. So there is some, money management insight there, I suppose. And the government basically said, well, look, he was great with tax dollars when he was the prime minister, so he'll be a responsible steward of AIMCO. And the issue with AIMCO has basically been twofold. The first is that the returns were not as good as the government had wanted on the investments that AIMCO was making, and that the costs for managing those funds were sort of going up. So Harper and the other people who've been appointed to the board will sort of be mandated with turning that around a little bit. It's going to be interesting to see how that turns out. There is now also going to be sort of permanent political representation on the AIMCO board in the part of, I think, the Deputy Minister of Finance. So AIMCO's been independent basically since it was created in 2006, I think. And there's arguably now a little bit of a deterioration in its independence from government. And I think it's interesting because AIMCO is one of those things that people paid attention to when things went wrong. There was some investment stuff during the pandemic that was a bit of a disaster. And the UCP has, for better or worse, I think, guaranteed that journalists and business reporters in particular are going to be keeping a close eye on what AIMCO is up to over the next few years. And it could be good news or it could be bad news. But either way, I think people are going to be watching to see how this plays out.
The Alberta government is considering making some changes to our driver's licenses. Now, at the UCP convention earlier this month, ministers talked about adding citizenship to licenses in order to make it easier to determine citizenship at the polling stations. Now, Tyler, even though this has been done before by other provinces, it's really not done anymore, is it?
No, I think BC and Ontario had done it before, and it's maybe one province still has it, but it's going away. So Alberta's going against the trend here a little bit, but I'm not sure why other provinces have dropped it. Although you can imagine a little bit of sort of paperwork inconvenience if people are acquiring citizenship in the middle of their driver's license period, and then they have to get a new one and pay the $100 or whatever. And so you can imagine it'd be a little bit annoying for some folks. But yeah, the citizenship thing was primarily a sort of a voter security measure is how they're sort of framing it. The other thing that could happen is we might get our health number on our driver's license. So it'd be a one card fits all kind of system. Of course, people have been talking about getting rid of the paper health cards in Alberta for ages and ages and ages. And I'm sure you do as well, have one sort of deteriorating in your wallet that you have to very carefully pull out every time you're at the doctor to make sure you don't shear it in half.
Actually, I had mine laminated, so it's
oh well, that's the way to do it. Mine is looking like an old Kleenex at this point. But there is apparently talk afoot to get those numbers on your driver's license. So you'll have one plastic card. It'll have everything you need. No decisions have been made on that front yet, but some possible changes down the road to the driver's license.
Tyler, the Alberta government is also moving forward with a no-fault insurance system, but unlike British Columbia and Saskatchewan, it will not be publicly funded. Officials say in the long run, this will actually help bring down the cost of insurance here in Alberta.
That's what they're saying. And in the short term, it's going to do the opposite. So the way it's going to work basically is for the next couple of years, the cap on insurance increases is going to go up. So insurance companies will be able to raise their rates by a little bit more next year and the year after. At that point, the no-fault insurance system is going to come in, and that basically means that if you are hit by another driver, you cannot sue the driver. There will be an amount of money that is set out that will be yours. You will get it. So it reduces litigation essentially, and it reduces the amount of money that an insurance company might have to pay out as the result of a court challenge. So that should, in theory, bring insurance cost to the insurance companies down. And in theory, they will then pass those savings on to Albertans in the form of lower premiums. This is pretty controversial in the insurance world, and certainly the accident injury lawyer world, who stand to lose out on a lot of their work because of this sort of thing. But in the long run, it ought to bring prices down. But again, we'll have to see if that actually plays out.
And like you said, if they pass the savings on to the consumers, that's what's key, right?
Exactly.
Just pocketing the savings. Tyler, for a couple more weeks, consultation is open on Alberta's assisted suicide regime. Now, the framework is set up by Ottawa, but healthcare is a provincial responsibility, so there might be some room to maneuver here?
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting situation, actually. So the way MAID is set up right now is there's basically two ways a person could receive assisted suicide. The first is a grievous and irremediable medical condition, that be something like late stage cancer, for example, and they could access assisted suicide that way. The other track that exists is for people who have disabilities and who are suffering significantly. There's a potential planned expansion of that to people for whom mental illness is their only sort of condition. That's been really, really controversial. In fact, the federal government has pushed back doing anything on that until I think 2027. Very strongly opposed by conservative parties across the country, by religious groups, for example. It's super controversial and super complicated as well. So the Alberta government has launched this consultation to essentially look at what Alberta could, in theory, do around its assisted suicide regime. So there was a case in Calgary earlier this year, for example, about a father who was trying to prevent his 27-year-old daughter from receiving assisted suicide. And it didn't go great in the courts for the father. He ended up dropping his court case for a couple of reasons. But all of it is to say this consultation is going to look at a few things. The first is whether or not there should be some sort of oversight board that looks at MAID approvals in the province. The second one is whether or not there should be some sort of dispute mechanism for families. So say your loved one gets approved for assisted suicide, you could perhaps challenge that in some fashion outside the courts. The third would be some way to release confidential medical information in those cases. One of the issues in the Calgary case I mentioned is that the judge did not force the young woman to ever actually say what her medical conditions were, citing sort of confidentiality. And the last one is perhaps restricting some of the criteria in Alberta in a way that would differ from the federal rules. So really, really complicated situation. There's all sorts of medical ethics questions, questions of autonomy, and all those questions about policy changes exist, I think, even if MAID is not expanded to those with mental illness as their only condition. You can imagine a scenario in which someone has a disability and their family opposes it, for example. So really, really touchy, complicated territory. But that consultation's ongoing, and we could see legislative or regulatory changes at some point down the road. And I'll certainly be keeping an eye on that because it could put Alberta offside, for better or worse, from other provinces, which would be a very interesting scenario.
He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Thanks again for joining us today from Edmonton.
My pleasure, Hal.
Did you know only 17% of small and medium-sized Canadian businesses are owned by women? Well, the federal government says they want to see that percentage rise. Joining us today from Langley to chat about this is Beverly Rasmussen. She is a small business expert who has worked with more than 700 businesses and is the founder of Systems Business Coach. Beverly, it's great to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks, Naveen. Great to be here.
Now, Beverly, you are an entrepreneur, a published author, and a small business coach. So in your own personal journey as a female entrepreneur, you probably experienced firsthand the struggles that many other women face when starting a business. So can you just share a bit of your story?
Yeah, happy to. I started my first business in 1993. At the time, I was a single mom. And my son was quite busy. He had been kicked out of a number of preschools. And so I had him with me a lot. And one day he, at the agency I was working for, he pulled a plug and he took out the internet for every travel agency in the Fraser Valley. My boss said, "Don't ever bring your child here again." And so, like many entrepreneurs, there's a story that catapults you into business ownership. So it was clear to me that the only way that I was going to be able to have a job was to create my own. And so I started this business. And fortunately, I built a $3 million a year company. I had 7 employees for 7 years, and I sold that business at a time you couldn't give an agency away. So there was a lot of experience and learning in that, which is a lot of what's in my book.
Now, why does it seem that it's more difficult for females to obtain financial capital to fund their business? Is there a social mindset that perhaps causes doubt the business ability of women?
Absolutely. I saw it every step of the way. Starting from the very first loan, I couldn't get a traditional loan. I had to get one from a third-party mortgage at like 14% interest. And then when I took the money into the bank, the bank manager said, "Where'd you get that money?" And he made me give it back. And then he gave it to me for 9% interest because all of a sudden now someone else believed that a woman could, get that money. That was the first experience. Fast forward many years later, I wanted to do a business expansion loan for our company. We were expanding internationally. And some of the, I don't want to call them out, but one of the loans for women entrepreneurs specifically, they said, yeah, we'll give you $100,000, but we're going to control how you spend it. So we're going to give it to you in $5,000 chunks. You would never ask a man. You would never put those kind of constraints on a man. And then the third example, recently after the pandemic, there was another loan offered by the government, in trying to keep everybody going. And I had to fight. My application was as clean as anyone, and had to really fight to get that. And I called them out on it. I said, if I was a man, this would not be a conversation we'd be having.
So when you're getting these no's as a woman, like how are they justifying the no?
I think it goes back to what you said, social norms and biases from days gone by. And, maybe women don't have as much access to capital. There's still an imbalance in the financial landscape across Canada.
But they can't just say no because you're a woman. So how are they saying like, well, we can't offer you this funding because ... Like, what are they saying?
They just don't offer it. They just don't offer it. And so you have to fight for it. You have to really, and this is where, speaking to women entrepreneurs, having a really clean business plan, knowing your story like the back of your hand, and having a financial model, a business model that works and you can see it on paper and you can explain it. That's really, we need to be a little even more diligent about what we're presenting here to the bank.
So what can women do to have more success in accessing funding for their business ventures?
Yeah, well, it starts with that. It starts with a solid business plan. You'd be surprised of the 700 business owners I've worked with, and quite a few of them women, they admit maybe 2 or 3 or 4 conversations in that they actually don't understand their income statement or their balance sheet. They don't really understand how the money flows through their organization. That's across all genders. By the way, I'm not just speaking to women. Every business owner has that issue, the ones that are struggling. And so that's the number one thing, know your numbers. That will get you, when you can say, I'm going to make salt as an example. This is my sales. This is my cost of goods sold. This is how I know it's going to be. This is my operating costs. It's a no-brainer.
And then with women, there's always the challenge with juggling the work and life balance with family. Any suggestions on that area?
Yeah, that's a really good point. The thing that worked really well for me, having been a single mom at the time, is I had to get that business to run independent of me. It had to be profitable because I would risk my house. I put my house on the line to remortgage to buy it, and I had to get it to run independent of me. And that's the difference between creating a job and creating a business. So you're creating a business, and so you want to take yourself out of it. Yes, if you're a hairstylist and you want to create a salon, you need to be able to have that salon running independent of you doing hair. And so that's the trick. Put those systems and structure in place so that it takes a little bit of work, but build it like a real business.
Do you have any advice on how to get a business started that runs so passively?
Yeah, it's step by step. It's again having that business model and then thinking about, the things that you do really well as a founder. We want to make sure we document them and we do them on time, every time, exactly as promised. Everyone in my organization did things what we called the Somerville way. It was Somerville travel. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't Beverly's way, it was the Somerville way. And so the things that we did well, we did over and over again. And those were the standards that we set. Just like Starbucks, FedEx, McDonald's, those same ideas. If you start that from the beginning, then you won't lose the essence of what you're bringing to the table. So maybe you're bringing a better widget, but you need to make sure that everyone does it your way at the beginning. And that doesn't mean there's not room for improvement. It's obviously continuous improvement, but having that base is a really good start.
And what are some things that women can or should do differently in their business than men do that makes them stand out?
Well, I like that question. The one thing that they already are doing is they actually hire more women. The statistics are 2.5 times more women business owners have women leaders in their organizations. And so, building off the, off that capital, that's been really helpful.
It's interesting that you said that because I was recently chatting with a sociology professor, and she was saying that when we were talking about gender pay gaps and women in the workforce and in business, they're saying that employers tend to hire people that either remind them of themselves or remind them of the previous employee. So men tend to gravitate towards men, and women would tend to gravitate towards more women. Now, a big part of what you do is coach women, especially in the area for developing systems for their specific business. Can you explain what you mean by systems?
Yes, I love that question because when I started this, people think of systems as your, standard operating procedure or a manual that sits on the wall. But my definition of a system is simply the way something happens. So systems thinking allows us to say, like, if you don't deal with an employee that shows up late every day and you just allow them to just continue to disrupt the organization, that in itself is a system. It's a broken system. So what is the system you need to have in place to deal with late employees? How to open the store, how to close the store, how to do your social media, every single thing, your leadership style. I built 52 different competencies related to leadership, operations, finance, marketing, team building, all different systems that you need, a delegation system, a communication system. It sounds a bit overwhelming, but when you put it through the lens of a system, it starts to bring it from some wild concept into really narrow focus. So you can say, okay, these are the things that I need. And what I say to entrepreneurs, anything in your business that's hurting your reputation or is costing you money or something that you don't know how to do, those are the systems to focus on first. Get those documented, figure them out and say, like, how do we want to do that?
And it seems like systems are a really great tool for making things efficient. I'm reminded of that movie that they did on Ray Kroc and where he was founding the McDonald's Corporation, and they had a system for everything. Like the fries were always on one side of the kitchen, and they did the kitchen was right in the center, and everything was laid out exactly the same. And I just remember like one of my coaches telling me like system should actually be an acronym: save yourself time, energy, and money.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
Now, is there a system to figure out if there is a market for your product in your area or if it's already overly saturated?
Yeah, again, going back to the business planning, and I'll give you a couple of let's say you're going and we're talking to business owners that are already in place. So pay attention to what's going on. So I'll ask someone when working with them. I say, "How did you get your first client?" And they'll tell you right away what they did. They put flyers, like a roofer, for example, went and put flyers on all the neighbors' roofs, houses to say, hey, we're doing your neighbor's roof. And that got them lots of business. And over time, they stopped doing that. With the travel agency, I figured out that seniors would buy fall color tours in February. And that was a big ticket item. It was $5,000 per couple. They would book every year, September 7, 8, 9, somewhere in there. So I started blocking half the bus and then marketing in February. And I would fill half the bus every time. Whereas the concrete show in Vegas were typically men going at the last minute. So I would block hotel rooms at a premium and I would sell them 3, 4, 5 days before the Vegas show. So in each individual business, there's things that are happening. So not to get distracted by the newspaper lady that comes in and said, we're doing a Remembrance Day, do you want to? Or like have your marketing systems well established so that okay, my clients on TikTok, that's where I need to, for an example, for young, for a particular market. So you need to know where your clients are, what they're doing, where they're hanging out, and be the authority in that space.
And when it comes to pricing, you don't want to be too high, but you certainly don't want to undersell your products or your services or what your products are actually worth. So how can a business owner really hit that sweet spot on how to price the product or service?
And it's a constant challenge. Because right now, think about this last year, interest rates have gone up, inflation, minimum wage has gone up, everything has gone up. And business owners are so kind and they want to be nice to their customers. And especially women business owners are like, yeah, but I can't raise my prices to my clients because they're not going to be able to afford it. They're not going to like me. There's more of that going on. And so being ruthless with your numbers, you need to, if you don't have a financial business model that works, you don't have a business. So really, you need to know, if minimum wage goes up by $1, that's $2,500 in Canada per year that you're going to have to spend per employee. So where are you going to get that money from? So go back to whether it's restaurants are notorious for failing, again, because of keeping that pricing model and knowing what it is every week, a system for monitoring your financials. That would be a perfect system. So then you can adjust your prices as you need to.
And for anyone, starting a business is a very risky thing, but any advice to women who are struggling to overcome the fear of failure?
Yeah, I guess I think it goes back to, if I look at my own situation, it was terrifying. And I didn't sleep for 2 weeks before it opened.
Oh,
and
wow.
I just remember that fear. And so going back, I had a business plan that my landlord made for me. And looking back, if I had really spent more time with that plan and understood what I was getting into, it would have mitigated a lot of that risk. So again, it goes back to planning, get a mentor, meet with people from your industry. You don't have to meet with someone in your town in your industry, but find someone in the US or in Europe or across Canada and partner up with another women entrepreneur as one example. Find out, where are the traps? And just if you know that 50% are going to fail, make the decision to be on the good side of that from the beginning. Don't do this with I got my hands in front of my face for those listening. Yeah.
And can you share any success stories of women who have managed to get a business started up and are still continuing successfully?
Yeah, there's lots. One of my couple right off the top of my head, Angie Quayle. She owns Well Seasoned, a gourmet food store here in Langley. I think their business just celebrated 20 years. She's been a powerhouse in our community, contributing to so many causes and systematized her business and just always has time for you. She's done really well. Sasha Pryor of Neza Naturals on Vancouver Island. They have a natural product store doing extremely well on Johnson Street and running that business. And I could give you another 60, 70, 80, give me some more time and I'll plug all of them. They're doing really well. Yeah.
Well, we're almost out of time, but what would you say to the women who are watching right now who are thinking of taking that step into starting up a business?
Yeah, do your homework. That's one. We've talked about the business plan over and over. The other thing, which was advice that I got, which I really appreciate, is have more money available than you think you're going to need. So let's say you think you're going to need 100 grand to get this thing off the ground. Add 25% more, even if you never use it. It was advice given to me. I borrowed an extra $25,000. That story's in the book. And I put it aside and I gave it back to the person who I borrowed it from. I didn't need it, but just knowing that it was there, because no one will lend you money at the point when you have no money. They'll only lend you money when you have, when you have that ability. So take it a little bit more, don't spend it, but just have it there. And hire a business coach, get some mentoring, get some help. Don't do it. You don't need to do this alone. If you're feeling alone and you're struggling, reach out, talk to your business bank manager. Just reach out.
Beverly Rasmussen is the founder of Systems Business Coach. Beverly, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.